Hello, I'm Michele Graham, and I'm delighted to be here today on behalf of Greenwich Library. Today, I'm interviewing Ada Calhoun and her wonderful book, Why We Can't Sleep, Women's New Midlife Crisis. Something I think a lot of women and a lot of our viewers will be able to relate to. The book is published by Grove Press. And Ada, we're delighted to have you here today.
Thank you, Michele. I'm delighted to be here with you.
All right, very, very good. So, Ada, you wrote this book. It's recently come out. When did you write this?
So it came out in January 2020. It took me about 2 years to write.
Oh, okay. Okay. So pre-coronavirus.
Yes.
And so typically you live in, where do you typically live?
I typically live in New York City. And yes, my book tour was actually cut a little short by the coronavirus. I was fortunate to get to a few cities before it hit. But then the rest of it is being done virtually like this.
That's great. And so are you in the New York City area now?
Now I'm upstate, actually. I have taken refuge from the city in the Catskills.
Okay, well, great. Well, hopefully everyone is safe and well and doing good in your location. So why we can't sleep, referring to the title of your book. Tell us a little bit about it. Before you were going to cocktail parties and people would say, Ada, what's your new book about? Tell us, in a quick couple of sentences, what is the book about?
Yeah, so it started out as an Oprah magazine article where I was asked to write why Generation X women seem to be struggling. And the article and the book were an attempt to describe why. And so there are a lot of factors, it turns out, perimenopause being one of them, the economy, the way we grew up, our expectations compared to what we find ourselves experiencing in midlife.
Okay, great. So you sort of go into, there's a few factors. You just mentioned perimenopause. What are the factors why women aren't sleeping?
So what I argue in the book is that it's quite complicated. There are many, many forces at work against the joy and sleepfulness of the Generation X woman. Part of it is that we grew up with very high expectations. So we were told you can be anything, even president. There was that Enjoli perfume commercial, I can bring home the bacon and fry it up in the pan and never let you forget you're a man. And we were told all those things, but we weren't given the support to really realize our dreams in many cases. A lot of middle-class women in this country thought they could be doctors and have children and do it all while looking fantastic and sleeping a full night. And many, many women get to their 40s and realize, you know what, it's not either not possible or it's not possible without quite a bit of misery.
Wow. So that's a lot going on with these women. And is it all women, or is it like a certain segment of women who are struggling more than others?
So for the book, I focused on middle-class women, but all over the country, and women generally from their late 30s to their early mid-50s. Just because I argue that they're a generational cohort that's worth looking at, that's often been very much ignored by the culture. But I think a lot of women can relate to just the sense of feeling overwhelmed and the sense that they aren't supported enough in trying to reach for the stars as they were told they ought to.
And so why is this cohort different than, let's say, their younger generation cohort? Because
Right.
this is women basically sort of 40 to 55 kind of ish.
Right around there. So I'm not arguing, first of all, that we had it harder or that it's uniquely difficult. What I am saying is that there are certain things that are new for our generation and that also will be true for many millennials and women that come after us, like probably. So our mothers and grandmothers, usually if they had jobs outside of the home, they worked 9 to 5. And usually if they had families by their 50s, they were empty nesters, even by their 40s. Because of the way that our generation is weighted to have kids, the way that we all need 2 incomes in most families, the result is that a lot of Generation X women are working full-time, stressful jobs, answering calls from their boss at midnight and 6 a.m., while also doing most of the household work still and raising young children while going through perimenopause. So it's kind of a perfect storm of sleeplessness.
So you yourself sort of had this epiphany because this was happening to you at
Oh
one
yeah.
point. And this was the genesis sort of for your book. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what was going on in your life at that time?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question. So I was having a very rough summer. I had had a ton of work fall through. I'm a freelancer and I ghostwrite books and I write for magazines in addition to my own books. And I had the worst run of luck and I found myself in deep credit card debt. I was the breadwinner, so I felt like it was all on my shoulders. I had one child going into junior high, one going into college. And I just felt like my career was over. I felt really old. I was going through perimenopause. I didn't know what it was. I just thought I was depressed and overwhelmed with finances. And that was the moment, thank God, an editor at Oprah.com called me and said, a lot of women I know are having a hard time. Do you think you could look into why? And so it was the perfect assignment at the exact right moment. Sometimes there are fairy godmothers in this world. And I wrote the story and it went very, very viral very quickly. It hit like 300,000 Facebook shares in a matter of days. And we knew that there was something to it. And I felt much better after that. I thought, oh, you know what? I'm not alone.
So you are not alone because you interviewed about 200 women for your book.
Correct.
And how did you find these women and what was your criteria in selecting them?
So I wasn't looking for women who were ecstatic and had like the perfect yoga body and, were doing it all seamlessly and never cracked a sweat. I really was looking for women who had stories to tell about the struggle. And the way that I found them initially was through the Oprah website, through their social media. The Oprah.com let me use their social media to send out a questionnaire to thousands of women. And I was able to go through those responses and find women I wanted to interview. I also talked to a lot of friends and a lot of friends of friends and friends of friends of friends. And I used social media to find people who were already discussing these issues in various places. There was one women's group that was fantastic, where they were having these very frank discussions about what it was like to be a Gen X woman in midlife. And I found one or two women there to talk to, tell me their stories in greater depth.
Can you share a couple of those stories with us?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm trying to think of who people respond to the most. One thing I'll say is that so many women told me a lot of the same things, even though they were in different parts of the country. So, I would have a woman who was in Portland and she had like a baby on her chest and she had two other kids. And she said, I never found a career. What did I do wrong? And then meanwhile, I'm in Texas and a woman has this amazing career, but no kids. And she says to me, like, I thought I'd have a husband. I thought I'd have children by now. What did I do wrong? So that was a recurring theme that I saw in many, many places. There's one favorite story that I hear people say they like quite a bit, which is a woman whose husband had left her, was going to take her children on a kind of like, we're going to get through this kid's like vacation for the weekend. And she was trying to get her kid to help her pack. This is a tween. He's on his iPad. And she says, if you don't help me, I'm going to smash that iPad. And he doesn't help and he doesn't help. And she gets a hammer and she smashes the iPad to bits. And she stood over the rack and she said, I started laughing when she told me. And she said, yeah, everybody thinks it's really funny because everybody, of course, has threatened similar things of their iPad wielding children. But actually it was really quite dark. And she realized she had to go get some therapy.
Okay, well, I actually think a lot of women can relate, not just with tweens, but with their kids of any age,
Yes.
getting to that moment where it's you're just at the end of your tether. And so you've also like really, really thoughtfully and thoroughly researched your book. And one of my favorite stats is you write, in 2015, fewer women ran large companies than men made named John. And 5 years have passed. Me Too has become a movement. As you did your research, what are some of the stats that really stuck with you, really resonated with you, really hit home, or even possibly angered you?
There were a lot that surprised me and made me upset. One that I was struck by that I think has struck a chord is that women today are spending more quote unquote quality time with their children, women who work full time, than stay-at-home mothers did back in the supposedly good old days, 60s, 70s. So they're trying to do so much more, even though they have a lot less spare time to give.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. What was there a couple of others that really were surprises to you?
The one thing that I was struck by was how Generation X had more credit card debt and more commercial debt than other generations. And we hear so often about millennials, and it's all real. They have this huge student loans, and they're facing this very uncertain future. But Generation X really pioneered the financial instability model because we've had wages not going up. A lot of us graduated into recession and hit one patch of bad luck after another, multiple recessions, and the housing crisis hit Gen X harder than other generations because we were, buying our first home right then. I found all that very validating, actually, all those numbers. I found some comfort in them to think, oh, it's not just that I somehow mismanaged my money and that's why I have this debt right now. There were some forces at work.
Yeah. And so, when you're talking about like the career and the house and owning things, there's one of the themes throughout your book is this emphasis that the Gen X grew up with this emphasis, especially women, on achievement, right? Mm-hmm. Like having it in your career, in your home life, in yourself. That's something I think a lot of women in Greenwich and Lower Fairfield County can really, really relate to. Can you expand a little bit about like that emphasis on achievement and how that came to be and how it manifests itself now in women's lives?
Yeah, so it's funny. I actually did quite a few interviews in and around Connecticut, and with women who had achieved so much. They had amazing families, amazing careers, beautiful homes. They had done so many things, but what I heard again and again was that they were looking and seeing so many things that weren't there. That somehow growing up, they were told they could be anything, they could do anything, and that morphed into this idea that they had to do everything, and they had to do everything perfectly. One expert I spoke with, she told me that women, high-achieving women especially, tend to rate themselves on almost an infinite number of scales. So, how am I doing as a mother? How am I doing as a housekeeper? How am I doing as a CEO? How am I doing recycling the trash? And that when you have so many categories you're trying to ace, inevitably one or more is going to be kind of not 10 out of 10 on any given day. And if you are focused on trying to make everything 10 out of 10 all the time, you will always be disappointed. You will always be frustrated. You will always feel like you're failing. And that was definitely something I heard from so many women. And what I hope the book does is provide some kind of liberation from that idea that other people have it figured out, that it's possible, and that's something that they should be focused on.
All right, so then let's talk about the book and some of the solutions that you discuss. So one of the solutions is reframing, and tell us what that means. How does that look in everyday life?
Sure. So this was something that so many of my favorite psychologists who I interviewed for the book told me, was that it's not as simple as just looking, on the bright side, but that actually it's very profound to look at your life and to sort of rewrite the narrative of who are the heroes, what does this mean, what was the beginning, middle, and end of your journey, things like that. And one person told me that she loved the story about an Uber ride where this woman had gotten in the backseat of her Uber. She was having a terrible day. The backseat was messy. She started handing the driver the trash and just really grouchily. And the driver was looking at her kind of judgmentally. And she's like, great, what, I'm helping you. And here you're, giving me this attitude. And then she looked out onto the street and she saw there was another woman there. And she thought, oh, this isn't my Uber. How embarrassing. And then she realized that it was not an Uber at all. It was just a man's car, and she had gotten into the backseat and started throwing trash at him. She got out. She saw this woman out there was the man's wife, and she's like, I'm so sorry. Here's what happened. And they all started laughing. they all started laughing very hard and hysterically on the street in the middle of the day, and they all thought it was so funny. And there's something about that moment that for that woman was very transformative, that she could see this not as a failure, not as something embarrassing that she had done, but actually just this moment where everyone was human and cut each other slack and connected over this thing that happened. And I think about that story all the time. I don't know exactly why it stuck with me so much, but I think it's quite lovely.
Well, one of the things that you also talk about is lowering expectations, or and I don't know if you want to say lowering or managing, but expectations. But to some people, that might sound a little bit like giving up. Is that how you see it, or is that how you want your readers to see it?
No, and also I really don't want it to be seen as, oh, women can't do all the things. They need to like stay in the home or something like that. No, the point is that we can do so much, but we need to pick what those several things are, and not assume that we can or should be doing everything all the time, all at once, and without any help. I think it's really important to require the world and our partners and our employers to support us in trying to do things that we want to do and that are important to us. And I think it's about picking which of those are. Is it that you're going to have an amazing home and this very close-knit family, or is it going to be that you are just as hard-charging CEOs and you spend really close weekends with your family? Or how are you going to negotiate all the different things you're trying to do without making yourself crazy? I just think it's about figuring out what the priorities are that you have and then focusing on those. And they can be running the world, but just be honest about you might not run the world and then also cook 3 meals a day. It's just the way it is.
You've talked about one woman, and this is towards the end of the book, and she's a CEO and she's a Gen Xer herself. And you talk about the women that she hires. And I thought this was really, really interesting because it's a certain kind of woman that she prefers for certain kinds of assignments. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about this woman? How did you find her? And why don't you share her story?
So she's actually become a friend of mine. I helped a little on her book, which is coming out this spring, about her life. She had a very rough childhood and she wound up becoming this CEO of this massive company. But I asked her about Gen X, and she told me that Generation X women, and she's one, and our birthdays are right in the same week. She said they have no sense of entitlement. They will work extremely hard. They have very low expectations of what they'll be given because they're sort of used to being these latchkey kids with very little support, and can multitask like crazy and are extremely loyal. And that's somebody that she tries to find in her company. She said many of them happen to be Gen X women, and she started to think maybe this is a generational trait or a kind of a way of behaving.
Well, and what kind of company is this that she has?
The produce company. She's the pumpkin queen of America.
The Pumpkin Queen of America. Wow. Well, that's a title. And
her book is The Growing Season. It's coming out in June, and it's fantastic. So readers should look out for that too.
Oh, that's something really to look forward to. But I love that she gives these women these really challenging assignments and knows that that's where their capabilities lie.
And she supports them. I think it's amazing that she says that these women are so valuable to her that she's willing to give them very high salaries, to let them work from home, to let them find ways to manage their own time because she knows they'll deliver for her.
Oh, that's great. That's really fantastic. So tell us, now that I know your book tour had to be cut short, the in live book tour, but you've been getting feedback, you've been talking to people. How did your life change while you were doing the book? And then since going out and promoting it and talking about it?
It was transformative for me. It really did cure my midlife crisis, talking to other women and forming these relationships with other women and hearing hearing that I wasn't alone. That for me was the biggest message of the book. And I've been really happy to hear on the book tour and through emails that that's a message a lot of women have been taking away from the book, that it made them feel less shame, and it made them feel more comfort and more of a sense of sisterhood with other women, especially women of this generation. So that's been huge for me. And that's why I read, is to feel less alone. And so the fact that women are having that relationship to this book makes me extremely happy.
Oh, that's great. Now, your children, boys, girls?
I have a 13-year-old son and a 26-year-old stepson. So,
okay. So
yeah.
So are you giving either of them advice in managing with the women in your life and in their lives, vis-a-vis what you've just researched and how women are feeling?
I'm really lucky. They saw me working on the book. They've both read pieces of the book. And my stepson is going into the medical field. And he actually said he now is thinking about having menopause be one of his specialties in terms of who he's treating. He's going to be a physical therapist. And I think that's amazing. I just think that more men should care. It's a huge part of the population, and it's a very, very deserving part of the population. And this menopause is not talked about enough, and it's very hard on a lot of women. And then my son too is like, he makes me breakfast every morning now, and he, helps a lot more around the house. And I think I'm very grateful for that.
It sounds like it's really made an impact so close to home. And hopefully, so when women read We Cant Sleep and they discuss it with their own families, how do you think their family dynamic can change so that women can sleep and they, and help them through this new midlife crisis?
Well, one thing that I've heard from a lot of women is that they gave the book to their sister and their friends, but then they also wound up giving it to their partner and maybe their mother-in-law and other people who they thought hadn't seen exactly what they were going through, or maybe who dismissed it and said, oh, you're lucky, you have nothing to complain about, you're fine. And if they were frustrated or angry or exhausted, it was dismissed maybe as, oh, it's just menopause, as if menopause could be just, a little trifle. And that after reading the book, they developed more empathy for the women who had given it to them, and sort of saw it like, oh, okay, so it's not just one thing. It's this pile-on of expectations and financial pressure and physical symptoms. And the combination is really what's getting a lot of women down.
So pre-coronavirus, is there anything you wish you had included in the book that you didn't have a chance to include?
It's really funny. I've actually gotten a lot of messages from women who are reading the book in lockdown right now and saying, oh, we need to have another chapter about this moment in our lives. It is hitting Generation X women once again very hard. Not like it's not hitting everybody very hard, but women are the ones who are doing a lot of the homeschooling of their kids who are now back at home, who are trying to protect their aging parents, many of whom are not taking it as seriously as we might like, and who are trying to work full-time while doing household stuff, and who have the pressure of maybe losing their job and having to try to figure out what they're going to do now that the world has collapsed in so many ways. So I think the book is maybe a prologue in some ways to what we're going through now. It shows how we were really on the edge. We were sort of set up for this moment to blow everything up and to not necessarily have a lot of support or protection in place to deal with something like this.
And yet there's also part of the resilience of the Gen X woman who has had to face all these hurdles and obstacles that can be working in their favor to make them more resilient during this period.
Exactly. So I think logistically and financially, we weren't set up for success, but I think emotionally and psychologically, we were very prepared because we're used to doing a lot of things for ourselves, a lot of things without a lot of support. And we've gone through so much as a generation. And so we know we're resilient. We know we can make it through hard times. We know we can take care of people, take care of ourselves. And so I think in some ways we're uniquely built for this. We also grew up watching an extremely large amount of television, which I know I am now doing once again for the first time since I was a little girl. So so that maybe is a preparation too.
Are there any women right now in our culture that you admire or you can see as a role model in managing through this period in women's lives? I mean, and not just the COVID crisis, but just in general managing their midlife crisis.
That's a really good question. I would say that now that I've met so many women in so many parts of the country, that I think every woman I've met who's holding it together at all through all of this is a role model. I think it's really, really hard. And I think that every woman who's, getting some food on the table and not having a breakdown every day, I think it's, well done. I think we should be proud of ourselves.
When going back to your research for a little bit, did you see any differences from urban women versus suburban women or rural women? Or was it sort of like the similar themes throughout, or did certain of the barriers like the financial or the home care, were they more pervasive in certain segments versus others?
Mm-hmm. So there were differences state to state. There were differences between women who were, say, part of a church versus atheist, and there were differences between Black women and white women. There were all these differences, but in the book, what I really tried to focus on were the things that a lot of us had in common. I think there's so much division in this country, and I think we're pitted against one another so often along different lines, city versus country, for example, Republican versus Democrat. And so I tried to include kind of every group in the book and to try to make everybody feel like this could be a book about them.
And just going back to one more stat, one of the things that surprised me, and the reason I asked the question is, it said 1 in 4 women who are middle-aged are on antidepressants. And that was a bit of a shocker for me. Was it equally shocking for you?
Yes, except that I did know many, many women who were on them, and I had been on them for a while. And so in that sense, I thought, okay, this is a national thing. This isn't just sort of neurotic New Yorkers. And then also I learned more about perimenopause and the treatments for perimenopause and how very often women who are going through hormonal changes, instead of having those hormonal changes addressed either through diet or hormone replacement or whatever, are put on antidepressants and sort of sent on their way. I think there's been, not to say that a lot of women don't benefit from them, they do, but a lot of those women who are on them because they haven't been treated by a menopause specialist.
Wow. And so what changed in your life once you researched this stat and sort of put the pieces together?
I made sure I found a better gynecologist. I made sure I found someone who understood the way that women's bodies work in their 40s and 50s. I think it's so important. That was another statistic I was really shocked by, was that only something like 1 in 5 doctors, 1 in 5 gynecologists actually specialize in menopause and focus on that in their course of study. It means that a lot of women are being dismissed, are not having their symptoms treated properly, and I think that's a real scandal. That made me very angry when I figured that out.
Well, it is disappointing and upsetting that the medical field wasn't aligning with what women were really feeling. But you end your book with talking in a very hopeful note. And there's a passage on page 22. Would you mind reading that and sharing that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Gen X women had sky-high expectations for themselves. The contrast between our you can be anything indoctrination and the stark realities encountered in midlife, when you might, despite your best efforts, not be able to find a partner or get pregnant or save for retirement or own your own home or find a job with benefits, has made us feel like failures at the exact moment when we most require courage. It takes our bodies longer to recover from a night of drinking, and it takes our spirits longer to bounce back from rejection. We may wind up asking questions like the one my friend posed to me the other night. Do you think my life is ever going to be good again? You may or may not run out of money, another woman told me, but you will definitely run out of time. As dark as all this may sound, I promise there is cause for hope. When I told someone recently that I was working on this book, he said, that must be depressing, talking to hundreds of women about how miserable they are. Actually, I found it the opposite. The project has made me feel less alone. It has given me clarity about my life and my friends' lives. I see now finally a way out of our crisis. It begins with facing up to our lives as they really are, letting go of the expectations we had for ourselves growing up, and finishes with finding a valuable support system and realizing that this stage of life doesn't last forever. The truth is, when you look at what we were up against as a generation, we are doing better than we had any reason to expect.
Wow, that's a great way to start looking at life. And so speaking of life, what's next for you? What are you excited about? What are you looking forward to once we can all get out of our houses?
It's been hard because one of the things, of course, I figured out while working on the book was that the company of other women my age was really keeping me going. And now we have to just have Zoom cocktails, and it's not the same. One thing that I'm doing, I hope, and seems like quite possible, is adapting this as a TV show. So
wow.
Yeah, so I'm working on figuring out how to do that now.
Who would you have play you?
No comment. I can't tell yet.
Well, that sounds like sounds like the book would make for a terrific series.
Oh,
so something very, very exciting. We will keep our fingers crossed for you, because this would be awesome to see it come to life on the screen. And hopefully we'll all be out of quarantine and we can have quarantinis to toast your success. So Ada Calhoun, thank you very much for sharing your time and your insights on why we can't sleep, Women's New Midlife Crisis. Again, it's available through Grove Press, and you can also get the e at Greenwich Library, or you can purchase a hard copy through our friends at Diane's Books. So thank you, Ada, and good luck with getting through quarantine and all your future successes.
Thank you, Michelle, for your wonderful questions and your seriousness, and thanks to all librarians everywhere. Also, I mean, libraries save my life, and I still spend a whole lot of time with them whenever I can, virtually or in real life. So, thank you.
I agree. Librarians rock.
They do.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Michelle.